Okay, so we're up to Genesis chapter 11. Genesis 10 was known as the Table of Nations, and it was the fathers of the original nations. And we saw how these original names of the men that fathered these regions were still being used centuries and centuries later by God. And I suppose because, borders and names change with time, but with many of these names we can still pinpoint the exact location, couldn't we? So knowing that areas are going to change and stuff, it's where he says they were, we know that's where they were originally. Because all these nations, they've been conquered, haven't they? They have conquered, they've been conquered, they've intermarried, they've travelled, etc. And that's why it's just so weird when people nowadays get fixed on genealogies, isn't it? And we don't need to worry too much about that stuff now, but it is interesting. And back then they all came from basically Noah and Mrs. Noah, so even more weird when people get really too caught up on this stuff. There were the sons of Japheth, we saw, which mainly went north, the sons of Ham, which mainly went south, and then the sons of Shem, which mainly stayed in that sort of Arabia type region. And we saw how the sons of Canaan, the cursed grandson of Noah, ended up being the inhabitants of the promised land and a bunch of reprobates, it seemed, by and large. We saw this mighty leader via Cush called Nimrod, we're going to look at shortly, and how it was through Shem and Arphaxad that the line to Abraham and eventually Jesus Christ came. Then Genesis 10:32 said this. Genesis 10:32 says, "These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood." Genesis 11 then continues then in verse 1, where it then says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech." So I'd like to pray before we continue. Father, thank you for this great chapter of the Bible. Help me to just preach it accurately now, Lord. Help me to preach it boldly, and help me to preach it in a way that people are just, really understand what your word's saying. Fill me with your spirit, please, Lord. Help me to just preach just what you want me to preach, Lord. And help everyone to just have attentive ears. In Jesus' name, pray all of this. Amen. Okay, so although chapter 10 went through these genealogies and the regions that they eventually settle in, at this point, it hasn't happened yet, okay? So chapter 10 went through all of that, but they haven't settled in those areas. Here, they're all together. They're journeying together, according to verse 2, aren't they? It says in verse 2, "And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there." The they is the whole earth, which was of one language and of one speech. So not only did they speak the same language, but they spoke it the same way too. So no like funny dialects or anything like that. It wasn't that they were already starting to change. No, they all spoke the same language. They had the same speech. They all completely understood each other. And then that obviously then massively changed after that. And if you're looking at that last chapter and thinking, well, I only saw about 70 names mentioned, so maybe it's just kind of a few people. That was just the 70 odd that fathered nations. There were plenty of names whose descendants weren't expanded upon as well, let alone the fact that there were wives, children of all of those and more. So at this point, it's a sizable bunch. But here's a question. At what point in time is this? Have you ever read this and wondered, well, when exactly is this post-flood? Well, look at chapter 10. We're going to just go back quickly to chapter 10 and verse 6 onwards, where we're introduced to Nimrod. So chapter 10 and verse 6 says, "And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan, and the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Raamah and Sabtecha, and the sons of Raamah, Sheba and Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth." So Nimrod is Noah's great-grandson. Okay, verse 9 says, "He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar." So it seems like he's the man in charge here at Babel, wouldn't you say? That's what it looks like to me. "Out of that land went forth Asher and built in Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah, and reason between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city." Which it would make sense happened after the scattering of everyone. Asher was the son of Shem. And considering we know that there were only 8 on the ark, this has to be a fair bit of time on for Noah's great-grandson to be running the show, wouldn't you say? For him to be the guy which seems to be in charge. First clue here is that we're quite a long way off from them coming off the ark, especially to have got to this point of his great-grandson, considering there were only 8 on the ark. So even if Cush had been born fairly soon after the flood, it would have to be a minimum 40 to 50 years, wouldn't it? But likely much more until Nimrod was in charge. Now, in Shem's genealogy to Abram later in the chapter, they're seemingly having the next son around 30 years old each time. So Brother Hooner's just read through that. And all of the daughters, the other kids, the fact that verse 1 described it as the whole earth, I reckon that we're a good about 100 years on. And the biggest clue for me is in chapter 10 and from verse 22, where it says this. Chapter 10 and verse 22 says, the children of Shem, Elam and Asher and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram, and the children of Aram, Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash, and Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. Unto Eber were born two sons, the name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now Peleg means division, so for me it wasn't until he was born, Peleg being in the line from Shem's, that's described in detail in chapter 11. Okay, so have a look at chapter 11, where we're going to do the maths here. So chapter 11 and verse 10, it said, we just read, for in his days was the earth divided, talking about Peleg. Chapter 11 and verse 10 says, these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. Okay, so Arphaxad is 2 years post-flood, okay, that he's born. Then verse 11 says, as Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 35 years and begat Salah. So this is now 37 years post-flood. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber. So we're now 67 years post-flood. Verse 15 says, and Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years and begat Peleg. So this is 101 years post-flood, and it was in Peleg's days that the earth was divided. Yeah? So children being born left, right and centre, yeah? We're at 100 plus years, 101 years that he was born, it was in his days. At some point after that we see then that the earth was divided. And by the way, we've already got to Shem's great-great-grandson here. That's who Peleg is, okay? Through only one of the 5 sons recorded in Genesis 10:22, let alone the rest, the daughters, the sons. I'm just trying to give you an idea, not only of the timeline here, but also the amount here. Now, Genesis 10 mentions 7 of Japheth's sons, 4 of Ham's, and 5 of Shem. So if we just assume that they were the only sons born, and I don't think that's necessarily the case, because we just kept seeing after and they begat sons and daughters after that, sons and daughters. But let's just go on the bare minimum, okay? 7 of Japheth's sons, 4 of Ham's, 5 of Shem's, okay, in Genesis 10. If we assumed equal daughters, okay, let's just, as an average, equal daughters for an estimate, so 32 total, there were 16 sons, let's go 32, and say each couple had a similar number of kids to these guys, okay? So 16 couples had 10 kids each, if you added male and female as an average, right, okay? Which is a fair estimate. That's the average that we've just seen of sons if we added daughters to that. So 16 couples had 10 kids each. We're up to 160 by the time of grandchildren. Then those 80 couples, because we've got 160, so you've got 80 couples out of that. And again, I know I'm estimating some might not have got married and had kids, but never mind, let's just give it a try. 80 couples had 10 kids each. We're up to 800 great-grandchildren. Those 400 great-grandchild couples had 10 kids each. We're up to 4,000 great-great-grandchildren. So we're talking about a population of easily 5,000 at this point, 100 odd years on, purely on just the names mentioned from the founders, basically as the founders of the nations. Just on those alone, you would already be up to, just if we just went by the average number of kids they seem to be having, etc., and if everyone was just pairing off and having kids as a general rule, you'd be looking at 5,000, but I think it's way beyond that, okay? So this is a lot of people. So I think because you could read it and see these names and then go, oh, they're all just think there's like 70, 80 people there, maybe 100 or something else. They've got a few big tents, a few little ones and everything else. No, you're talking already, for me, thousands of people already, okay? 100 and something years post-flood, and it could be further than that as well. It just said in Peleg's days. It could be another generation on from that. And then you're going up to sort of, you know, the multiple thousands, yeah? Okay, so just an idea for that. And like I said, along with equal daughters, the reality is likely much higher. They're just the names mentioned for the genealogies. But that's why verse 1 said, just to give you that idea and just to confirm that, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. It didn't say, oh yeah, like these people, that little group. and that family, you know, with a few generations, no, the whole earth, okay? Because there's a lot of people already now, okay? We're talking thousands of people was of one language and of one speech. And the reason I say that is because it just helps us to understand the picture that we're going to see here a bit more. It's not just a few people in a few tents, yeah, and their great-grandchildren with them. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So remember that the ark rested in the mountains of Ararat, which is almost directly north from Shinar, by the way. So over these like minimum 100 years, like we said, they've likely travelled probably therefore southeast over the region that we now know of as northwest Iran, down to West Iran, sort of central West Iran now, and they're now travelling west across what we now call Iraq, just south of Baghdad, because it said they journeyed from the east. So that would have been from that kind of western central Iran region, okay? And now, what the plains of Shinar seem to be just south of Baghdad, okay? So as we know it now. Verse 3 then says, and they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime had they for mortar. Now, just a point, these weren't Neanderthals, were they? Okay, like kind of people would like to try and make out. Although I don't think they do at this point because they can't get away from all the evidences of language and everything else. But this was early man, but early man wasn't millions of years ago or whatever they claim, hundreds of thousands of years ago for man. But they fully understand how to make bricks, which, you know, it's quite interesting this, isn't it? They're basically, bricks are usually majority clay. I was kind of having a little look at this before. They dry them and they heat them into a hard brick, and then depending on modern bricks now, what they add to that as well, but they're still majority clay. So here they're basically getting clay, they're drying it out into the shape of whatever size shape bricks they want, and then they're heating it thoroughly is what it said. They burn them thoroughly to make them into the hard brick as we know. Now, the slime is obviously some sort of adhesive type mud. Now let's look at this story and then we're going to go through it. So verse 4 says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower with the children, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Okay, so we're going to have a closer look, okay? Verse 3 says, and they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly, and they had brick for stone and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Okay, so first thing to note here is that they seem to be a united group, wouldn't you say? This seems to be a pretty united group. They're saying this, let us do this, etc. So there seems to be some sort of unity, some sort of agreement here. And there are two things being built. Notice it's a city and a tower, because I think sometimes people try and merge it into one. It was the Tower of Babel, but no, they're building a city and they were building a tower. The city would be for them all to live in, but why a tower to reach unto heaven? Now, one interpretation, which I think you could reasonably go to, would be that it represents an attempt to reach heaven through the work of men's hands. Yeah, so it's kind of an image, a picture of a sort of works type salvation, but also, look, also a centralised world religion, with them making them a name, it says here as well. It said, let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. However, don't forget that they were, you might look at this, go, well, fair enough, you know, they don't want to split up and everything. But what were they commanded in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 1? Genesis 9:1 says, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the land of Shinar. No, replenish the earth. Okay, so they are meant to spread and they are meant to replenish the earth, fill the earth. However, here they're saying, let us not be scattered abroad. So already they're basically going against God, aren't they? Okay, they're going, let's all just stay together in case that happens. I think they know full well that what they're doing is wrong as well. They should have been scattered. And like I said, this is defiance to what God commanded. But what would, now let's, away from the spiritual kind of picture, and I think there is a spiritual picture of a sort of work salvation type tower to heaven, basically building their own way to heaven, okay, working their way to heaven. I think that's pretty obvious. I hope everyone agrees here. But what would the practical purpose of a very tall tower be? I'll tell you what it'd be: control, surveillance, an attempt at godlike control over people's lives, wouldn't you say as well? Yeah, you've got a very tall tower in a big city, you've got somewhere to watch and observe and look at everyone before you get to the days of security CCTV cameras everywhere like we have today, right? Okay, so for me it's a sort of, there is that as well. And the reason I say that, because I don't believe you can read this story, or hopefully you won't do after today, and escape the parallels between this story of Babel and the eventual one world government prophesied to come at the end of the world, okay? So there's clearly a lot of parallels. I'm going to show you them today. So turn to Revelation 13, which gives us a lot of info about what's to come, okay? Revelation 13 we're going to look at, and obviously we will be coming back to Genesis 11, but Revelation 13 and verse 5. It's talking about the Antichrist, the head of this one world beast system to come. Okay, so he is the head, but this one world beast system, the beast system itself is the beast, but he is the head of that beast, the Antichrist. Verse 5 says, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. This is Revelation 13:5. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Now, obviously this is opposition to God. We've just seen that, haven't we? We've just seen them basically defying God's rule, God's commandment to go and replenish the earth, saying, let's all stay here lest we be scattered, okay? So first off, opposition to God. Verse 7 says, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. That's a one world government, isn't it? Yeah, if the Antichrist has power over all kindreds and tongues, that's languages, and nations, that's basically a form of one world government, isn't it? Verse 8 says, and all, notice that, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. So then we see the false prophet introduced. But we're going to jump forward to verse 15 here. Jump forward to verse 15, which then says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Now, some sort of surveillance there, right? A way of keeping tabs would be needed, wouldn't it? To find out who is and who isn't worshipping the image of the beast. Again, I don't know exactly how that will work, but you could argue that something like that would be needed. Verse 16 says, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And just a quick point on those two verses there, because sometimes people go, well, look, everyone's going to take the mark. No, he causeth all. Okay, so basically he's trying to force all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive mark in their right hand or on their foreheads. However, verse 17 says, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. So clearly there's going to be those that don't have the mark, right? Or the name of the beast or number of his name. Now that's a one world cashless society, isn't it? Because how on earth are you going to be able to regulate that at all if there was just cash and people are just trading cash? Okay, no one's going to stop you or I trading something with each other for cash without a mark, with or without a mark. However, this seems like a cashless society. And the way this world is going, I think most people would agree with that. Okay, you can see that we're clearly seem to be kind of pedal to the metal on our way to a cashless society. So it seems. I would hazard a guess that there are people here, and that's just the reality of it. And by the way, you fighting against it ain't going to change that, really, okay? Who probably haven't used cash all week, maybe some all month. That's the reality of life right now, isn't it? Okay, this is coming on quickly. Okay, and obviously the COVID stuff really sped that up as well. Okay, so it's a one world cashless society. He says in verse 18, here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. You don't have to turn to it. Genesis 11:4 said, and let us make us a name. Okay, the number of the beast is the number of a man, and his number is 666. They want to make themselves a name. So Genesis 11 for me is definitely a picture of the end times to come. I would also add, though, to that Nimrod from chapter 10 pictures the Antichrist. Before we go there, look at verse 4, where we are in Revelation 13, where it says, and they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, that's the Antichrist, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? So there's a sort of admiration for this beast system and its leader, who came back from a deadly wound, didn't he? And we're not going to go there just for sake of time. But back in Genesis chapter 10 now and verse 8, we've just read who is able to make war with him, talking about the beast, with their worshipping him. So they're putting him on some sort of pedestal. We'll look at Genesis 10 and verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Before the Lord is just in the sight of God, okay? Verse 10, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Okay, and in case anyone's going, what about those other areas? They're basically adjoining lands, okay? So Erech here, Akkad, and Calneh, basically he was the boss of the wider area as well. So a central city, but the other lands too, again. And bear in mind, the whole world is in this area of the plains of Shinar. He's basically a one world leader at this point, okay? So again, a picture of the Antichrist. Now, you can look at this stuff, and you could be sitting there or reading this and go, okay, brother, here, maybe I see the similarities, but so what? What's the point in any of this? Why is God even, why has he relayed the story in this way? Why did that happen? And does it even matter? Does it make any difference? Well, you've got to ask yourself a question in the Bible. When you see things like this, what does God want us to learn from these pictures? So there's something for us to learn from it. It's not, oh, what a cool thing that events happened in, 1,000 years ago which pictured the end times. Yeah, that is a cool thing, isn't it? It's amazing. Sometimes you just read the Bible, you just think, oh, how does this even work? I don't even know how that works, with things working out and stories happening and the way they're related and everything else to give us these pictures and everything else. But I think he wants us to learn from it as well, because for me, pictures in the Bible all come together to make a bigger one, especially when it comes to the end times. So when it comes to the end times, there's many places in the Bible where we see pictures which all come together to make the big picture, yeah? And give us little bits of information which I think add to the facts of what's going to happen. And here our leader of this one world government was mighty and described as a mighty hunter. Okay, so first lesson for me is not that the Antichrist is going to be spending his weekend stalking deer. Or maybe he will, I don't know. Maybe he'll be some guy that's very good at that. However, I think it's more likely because he's going to be hunting Christians. And he's going to be a mighty hunter. Okay, I think he's going to be a great hunter hunting Christians. I think that, because that's basically what's going to be going on, isn't it? And I believe that not only is he going to be mighty, but, for me, the lesson here is that you're not surviving the tribulation by building the best bunker. Because he's a mighty hunter. Okay, you're not surviving the tribulation by living off-grid. Okay, by avoiding smartphones, by turning your location history off. Whatever. People do that stuff, It's just like, man, I'm not letting them. They're not going to track me. Look, that's not how you're surviving the tribulation. Okay, by avoiding social media or any of that stuff. No, the only way you can survive the mighty hunter is with the help of the Lord, who he's hunting in the sight of. Yeah, he's a mighty hunter before the Lord, isn't he? And the only way you're going to survive it is through the Lord, who's seeing everything's going on. Verse 9 said he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. You don't have to turn to it, but Matthew 24:13 says, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. How do we survive the tribulation is by enduring. And when we're saying survive, this has got nothing to do with salvation. How we survive, not getting our heads chopped off, not getting a physical nasty death during the tribulation when we're being hunted by a mighty hunter before the Lord, is by enduring in the things of God. And the next verse in Matthew chapter 24 verse 14 talks about the gospel needing to be preached, okay, to the ends of the earth. The way we endure is by preaching the gospel. The way we endure is to carry on serving God. And the only way you're going to survive this mighty hunter, Nimrod being a picture of him, is by enduring into the end for God, not by your own skills, not by your ammunition, not by, and here, it'd have to be crossbows and air guns. Crossbows are quite good, yeah, but in other nations, there are people stockpiling all sorts, aren't there? Stockpiling, going to get the guns ready for the tribulation. They're prepping for it. They've been prepping for it for years. Is that going to make them survive it? This guy's a mighty hunter and he's got a one world government behind him. You think you're going to survive? I mean, they've got some amazing technology out there, haven't they? But do you know who's more amazing than any of that? Is the Lord. It's the Lord. And he can make you survive. He can make you keep going. I mean, some would argue, even some of the churches right now, just the fact that they're still functioning, things are going on. They haven't been bombed to oblivion, and I know they kind of gave a little idea of that with Pastor Beer's church, but he's still there, isn't he? It's because of the Lord. It's because of God. Look, I often say this. I think it's hard sometimes to probably really imagine how much we really have against us. How much, spiritual darkness would just love to destroy this church and other like-minded churches. You're going out preaching the gospel, and you'll do it. And we have a church where the majority of our church is going out every week preaching the gospel. Believe me, the devil wants this church ended, doesn't he? And we couldn't even be here, I don't think this church would survive another week if it wasn't for the protection we receive anyway. And that's going to be the same in the tribulation. The only way you're doing it is with God, right? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, okay? It's still in the sight of God. God is still in charge. Okay, what else can we learn? Well, back in Genesis 11 and verse 3, it says, "And they said one to another, 'Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone, as slime had they for mortar. And they said, 'Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach under heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.'" Okay, lesson number 2 for me is that the people are going to be united behind him. Okay, it didn't say then Nimrod told them all, "I'm going to cut your heads off if you don't do what I say." Didn't say and Nimrod said to them all, "Go and do this." No, they said one to another. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower." And that's going to be the reality of it. Okay, the reality of it is you're not going to, reach all these unsaved people to just really, in fact, sadly, probably half of the saved people and convince them that this is actually the Antichrist. The truth is, so many people are going to be in agreement with everything going on. They're going to be in agreement with this one world government and see him as this sort of saviour type figure, this hero. Obviously, a lot of the world are going to see him as some sort of version of he's a false Christ, basically, isn't he? And other religions are going to see him as some sort of, basically, prophet or whatever else. And they are going to be united behind him. And that's going to make things harder. So if you find it hard right now, feeling like a bit of an odd one out at your family gatherings, or, when you see your old buddies, or when you're, at work or anything else, well, get used to it, because it's going to get a lot worse. Okay, it's going to get a lot worse, where you're going to have people united behind one of the wickedest people ever. In fact, the probably wickedest person ever. And they're going to be united behind him and in agreement with everything going on. And the world, cashless, the mark. Why wouldn't you get a mark? Amazing. I'd have to type 100 different things in some stupid card reader to make a payment anymore. I just, done. All that sort of stuff. People are, I don't have to remember all these pins and passwords anymore. Why wouldn't you get a mark? And why wouldn't I worship the beast? This guy's amazing, isn't he? He solved all our problems. And it's going to be that sort of thing. They said one to another, "Go to, let us make brick, burn them thoroughly." And I think he's got people of the world to support, to be together, to be behind all these plans of one world governments and beast systems and cashless societies. And really, I think he's probably going to unite them all to want to hunt down Christians as well. That's probably really likely what's going to happen and obviously once they start taking the mark, they're going to be reprobates anyway. But the truth is, people are going to be for this sort of stuff, aren't they? Yeah, they're a danger because they're not, whatever it is. They're like anti-establishment, and they're the reasons we don't have peace. They're the reasons for whatever it is. And you can see how this sort of stuff is going to happen, right? There's another thing we can learn. There's going to be a centralised power. They said, "And let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach under heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." So this centralised power, I don't, there's a few arguments where that's going to be. However, regardless, they're all going to be pretty much yoked up. So think the ecumenical movement. And I mean, that's quite amazing, really, how quickly that's come on quickly, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't long ago think Belfast, where we were recently. It wasn't long ago that these people were trying to kill each other, apparently. Or at least some kids were throwing over a few Molotov cocktails every now and again, and they were really hyping it up on the news. I don't know. But what I do know is that it seems nowadays that all of that's just petering out, all this kind of so-called religious violence. And these people will be united in their hatred of only one religion, won't they? And what's that? The people that deny that there's many paths to God. So there's going to be an ecumenical, centralised type power. They're going to be all united here. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And for me, with that, with this tower, there will be a huge overreach from a snooping government. I think so as well. Okay, and we're seeing that, obviously. I mean, it's getting ridiculous, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous, that overreach of snooping. Don't they claim that the ULEZ, is it the ULEZ cameras can like zoom into your car and really get a real clear picture of everything you're doing and everything else? And look, there are some idiots that drive along, you know, kind of while playing games on their phone and stuff. I think it gets as bad as that. But, however, you know, the snooping, the kind of, this stuff is getting out of control as well, isn't it? So I think there'll be, and the reason I say that is because of that tower. What's that tower for? 1,000 years ago. That tower's to snoop on a big city. Okay, that for me is at least a practical purpose of it, as well as being a picture of a work salvation. That's what that centralised religion is, isn't it? It's all basically a centralised religion of work salvation. Work salvation in one way or another, that's what they all believe in, that's what they all are following, some form of works to get you to heaven. Okay, so verse 5 then says, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men build. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." And is that something else that we're seeing now? Wouldn't you say we're heading back to a one world language? I don't think, you know, I don't think there's probably been a time in history with a language, and I'm talking about English here, okay, having this much just, well, not just the amount of people that speak it, but the amount of power it has as well in terms of just the influence from English-speaking nations. It's big, isn't it? And most people at least speaks at least some English, don't they? And let's be honest, a lot of people are fluent in English, and some try and like muddy the waters with the Chinese things. It's purely based on numbers. But as a second language, I don't think, you know, I don't think many people have a second language of Chinese. But as English, I would say it's borderline across the board, isn't it? So many people speak English, and here they all have one language. And I think that's something that obviously we're heading fast towards, and we're seeing a lot. And a lot of that is because of the influence of the media, influence of Hollywood, etc. Because people are just watching stuff, and they're learning so much through what they're watching, what they're listening to, music as well. And with that one language, what you then see is a centralised influence, don't you, as well? So the power of that one language is then the power of the influence coming from a much smaller place. So when everyone's speaking different languages in different nations, there has to be a lot more of a kind of concerted effort to influence everyone the same way. And there has to be a lot more going on behind the scenes, isn't there? Whereas when everyone in the world is listening to English, and all the money and all the big movies and all the big media outlets and all the big music producers and all the best so-called sounds, you know, that appeal to the flesh and everything else is all in that one language. Think the influence those small minority of people can have across the world that they never could before. Nothing like it is now. Massive influence in all aspects of life coming from a minority of people, really. Okay, because of the fact that English is just everywhere. They don't have to now go and convince, you know, through their banking cartels, whatever nation it is, to get on board with their sodomy propaganda, for example. They don't have to go to somewhere else and butter them up enough to get on board with their feminist propaganda. No, it doesn't matter, because they just beam Hollywood movies, Netflix series and everything into every house across pretty much the world, don't they? Within reason. It's getting there, isn't it? And the influence is crazy because of that. Back in Genesis 6:5, by the way, it said this, because we just saw it said, "And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do." Oh, well, it can't be that bad, can it? Maybe they just imagined some nice, you know, buildings and a nice little tower and a good city. Well, Genesis 6:5, it said, "And God saw the wickedness of man, saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." So here he said, "And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do." Because why? Why? You look at that and go, why is that? So firstly, point being, from Genesis 6:5, is that, look, the thoughts of man's heart is evil, okay? Okay, things haven't suddenly changed after the flood with that. In fact, we've got a whole reprobate nation of Canaanites and their kind of spawns after that as well, but who are cursed at the least. But he said, now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do, because basically they have full centralised control and influence. That's what I believe. Because the influence is centralised, so now they're able to just influence the masses at will, easily. okay, with that one language, with that one world government, with that one point of control. And that's a pretty weird thought to think about, isn't it? And that's really the reality of what we're seeing going on in this world today, aren't we? Okay, and look, you know, it's just amazing, isn't it? You're reading, and when you just go into it a bit deeper, you start to see that it's in you know, a story, in a moment in history. I mean, thousands of years ago, recorded in the Bible, and you just see it playing out in our world now, don't you? Just amazing. However, like with the coming tribulation, God intervenes. Verse 7 says, "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city." So, for me, another small picture here of the second coming of Christ. Turn to Revelation 6, where they seem to get scattered too when Jesus Christ comes down. So here he says that the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth. And in Revelation 6, we see Jesus Christ return. Revelation 6:15 says, "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" Not exactly hanging around in any major cities, are they? In fact, these guys are going to the tribulation bunkers, aren't they? Okay, they're going in the dens, they're hiding in the rocks, okay, of the mountains. This is outside of the cities. This is people trying to scatter, basically. Jesus Christ returns, and they're scattering in the wrath. And back in Genesis 11, there's something else interesting where we see the Trinity again as well in those couple of verses. Verse 7 of Genesis 11 says, "Go to, let us go down." Notice that, let us go down. "And there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." Who's the us? That's the Trinity. That's the Trinity, or at the least it's God the Father and God the Son. But then notice this, and this is just, you know, again, the Trinity in two verses, or at least to show that two different persons, at least here, but one God. But obviously, we know that it's three persons, ultimately the Trinity. It then says in verse 8, "So the Lord scattered them abroad." So he said, "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language. They may not understand one another's speech." And then it says, "So the Lord scattered them abroad." Because the Lord is a Trinity, yeah? So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. And just another point here. Here's a thought. Who are most likely to get the mark of the beast? Oh, we're talking about scattering. If it was any time soon, okay, if it was any time soon, I know a lot of people, you know, kind of think it might be. I don't think we're that close yet. It would be the liberal, brainwash, English-speaking West as more likely than many, wouldn't it? Okay, they would be pretty close to the front of the queue. I know there's a lot of control over in China as well, but I would say the liberal, brainwashed, English-speaking West would be just queuing up like they were for the COVID jabs. Yeah, just like, get it on board. Yeah, give me two if I can. You know, they'll be loving it, won't they? And when Christ rules and reigns in a millennial reign, there will be those remaining that didn't get the mark, won't there? Yeah. There'll be those that didn't get the mark. And obviously, because if you get the mark, what happens? You reprobate, aren't you? Okay, so there will be those that didn't. Maybe the remaining nations and languages will be scattered again too then. Ever wondered that? Maybe those remaining in the earth will be those, maybe, that weren't the centralised Western liberal kind of, you know, masses out there. And maybe those remaining nations and languages will be scattered like we see here. After that, or even at least those remaining in those outer areas will probably be less likely to go and get the mark, won't they? Would you say those living in more remote parts of the world will be less likely to probably queue up for the mark? Because I know people in the cities around here will be probably getting the mark before it's even released. At least they'll be camping outside. They'll be camping outside like they do when a new bit of technology comes out for a week before, in some dodgy tent on the streets with the hobos. And look, maybe, well, with that as well, one other point in that, he said, "And they left off to build the city," in verse 8. Maybe that city, that kind of centralised one world government type place will be left off. Left off sounds like they're coming back to it. When do they come back to it? 1,000 years later, don't they? At the end of the millennial reign, when Satan is loose for a season and gathers together people, multitudes as the sand of the sea, and people just rebelling again against the Lord Jesus Christ and choosing that deceiving devil in front of, instead of him. But anyway, the point being that, maybe we are going to see some languages change again, etc., which is why, those regions, why those, ruling and reigning with Christ, there'll be different areas, and those of you that speak different languages, maybe you won't be ruling and reigning in Wickford or in Southend or something else. Maybe you'll be getting somewhere a bit more exotic. Be careful what languages you learn, that's all I'm saying, all right? Because it could get a bit rough for you. Yeah? Okay. But anyway, verse 9 then says, therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So the more I think about it, the more I believe that we will see something similar when Christ returns. I do think that. I think that we will see a scattering as well. We'll see a scattering of languages again. We'll see no more of this centralised English sort of whole system going on, and I don't mean necessarily from England. It seems to be obviously, the US with those that say they're Jews and they're not, but the synagogue of Satan surely behind most of what we see. However, I think that we'll see that scattering. I think that that will be those vast majority of the world that get the mark, won't they? Will be those from those sorts of nations. Verse 10 then says, these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. Now, okay, so Shem was 100 years old, okay? He begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood, and then he lived another 500. So Shem lived to 600, yeah? Arphaxad lived 35 years and begat Salah, and Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. So he lived to 438, Arphaxad. Then Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber, and Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. So he lived 433. And Eber lived 34 years and begat Peleg, and Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. So he lived to 464, and Peleg lived 30 years and begat Reu, and Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years and begat sons and daughters. So he only lived to 239. So point being, you can see these ages decreasing and decreasing. Yeah, there's a little bit of a curveball in there with Eber, but they're all going down from the 600 before. And remember, before, pre-flood, and even with Noah after, Noah lived into his 900s, and pre-flood, I think we got up to 967, I think it was Methuselah, wasn't it? Was the eldest. It's around that age. So now we're massively dropping in age, aren't we? And Reu lived 230 years and begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. So that was 239 as well. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. So that was 230 years old. And Nahor lived 9 and 20 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah and 119 years and begat sons and daughters. That was 148. And then Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, if you add up all of that, Terah, when he begat Abram, it was 292 years post-flood, okay? So he had Abram, well, at least we know that he begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran, and maybe they were triplets, because it does say 70 years he begat, or at least it was after those 70 years that he begat them. But this is 292 years after the flood. And in Genesis 9 and verse 28, Genesis 9:28 says that Noah lived after the flood 350 years. And all the days of Noah were 950 years and he died. So, interesting point here, well, a couple of interesting points here. Number one is that Noah was still alive when Abram was born. And for by the looks of it, over 50 years. So Abram was able to possibly, I don't know if he ever took up the chance of doing that, but was able to talk to Noah. You know, Noah was still there. Noah was a saved man of God, wasn't he? Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Noah, so it's not that, everyone was just unsaved. look, they were saved people, right? Okay, and then we get to the point of Abram, and obviously, you know, and we're going to look at him shortly, but he was still alive, which is quite interesting to think about, isn't it? But here's another thing with that as well, is that Noah lived still 950, even though he served out over half of those years pre-flood, didn't he? So he still lived a long time. So it's, I don't know, because some people say it's to do with the atmosphere and things afterwards. There must have been this sort of, you know, this protective sort of layer of water. Well, how come Noah still managed 950 then? With about 350 of those years or something being post-flood. So, in fact, it was 350 years. So there's something strange there, isn't there? Their ages are all decreasing, but maybe it's more of a genetic thing rather than something to do with the atmosphere of the world. Because Noah didn't just suddenly, right, okay, I better like Peter off here now. He still did 350 years post-flood. Yeah, something to think about there. But, okay, so where are we? Verse 27 says, now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So Lot's father Haran, who's Abram's brother, died in the place he was born, which was Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. So Nahor's wife was his niece, the late Haran's daughter. But don't forget as well that we're still at this point, like we've said before, there was this, you know, they've kind of still genetically, they've got all these different genetic variations. They're still, at the end of the day, trying to build here and you know, the world's being replenished at this point. Then as I think things get a bit, you know, kind of the genetics start to boil down a bit more, then we see eventually those incest laws come in as well, yeah? And like I said before, probably at this point, they probably were as different as chalk and cheese, whereas when you start to look alike, it gets weird, doesn't it, okay? Okay, but verse 30 says, but Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And just last point on that as well, just because it was his niece, don't start thinking this guy must be some sort of weirdo, because bear in mind they're having a lot of kids, yeah? Who knows what the ages were? For all we know, they were similar ages as well, yeah? Okay, let's keep going here. Terah took Abram his son, Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. Now this is sort of northern Syria as it is now, and it's about a 600-mile journey from Ur of the Chaldees. So that's a long journey before cars and stuff, isn't it? Now I know there are animals, and you know, I'd hope that they kind of got to use at least a couple of camels or something. I mean, that's a big old journey. 600 miles. Can you imagine how long that would take to walk? I mean, you'd be looking at, I talked about this before, I think a mile's probably about 4 hours. So you're talking like, 4 miles is about an hour, okay? So you're talking about 400 miles is about, well, 400 hours, right? And that's a lot of time. Sorry, 100 hours. So, yeah, you got about 100 hours plus, 150 hours plus of walking. That's a lot of time, isn't it? You're talking a long, long time of travelling, which is now, so this Ur of the Chaldees and northern Syria. So Ur of the Chaldees, if you're wondering, is basically now South Iraq near Kuwait. So right down the south of Iraq, if you remember when they had that Iraq war, Kuwait's kind of bordering it on the southern tip of Iraq. And that's a long journey, isn't it? To end up near the Canaanites. Don't you find that a bit strange? They went on a 600-mile trek, yeah? And, I mean, for what? To end up right by the Canaanites. A bit of a bizarre choice, wasn't it? Strange thing to do. I don't really know why they did that, but it then says in verse 32, and the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So he seemed to make this choice to go to Haran, and then it seems after he made that choice to go to Haran, he then died probably not a long time after, I'm not sure. I mean, he obviously had them at 70, but I don't know how long it, I mean, that's 600 miles, that's a long journey, isn't it, on foot? Wow, can you imagine that? So, yeah, I don't know what happened there, but he was 205 years and then he died in Haran. So, point being that, look, That's interesting. There's just so many little things you can get from a little genealogy, aren't there? To see that Noah was still alive then is, for me, pretty fascinating. But the main part of that chapter, look, that picture of the end times, I think, is fascinating. I think you can learn a lot from these different pictures. You can learn stuff, obviously, from different parts of, obviously, the book of Daniel and many others where we just see these pictures of the end times. That's a great one there. That's some interesting stuff we can learn from that. And I hope that people have been edified in one way or another by that. On that, we're going to finish up with a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for this just a great chapter of the Bible there with just so much we can learn about what's to come, Lord, and just help us to be prepared so that we're not so shocked when things go the way that we know they're going to go at some point, whether it's in our lives or our children's lives or their children's lives or further on from that, Lord. Just help us to always be just ready and prepared, grounded in your word, Lord, not shocked by events because we're not listening to what you're warning us and telling us about them. Even in pictures, even in things that happened, thousands of years ago, we can learn so much about what's to come. Help us to want to do that, Lord. Help us to want to also just study your word and study out, those things. It can sometimes be a bit harder for us to really spend that time to look into things like genealogies. Just find those interesting little tidbits in there, Lord. Help us to just, always want to study to show ourselves approved, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly divine the word of truth. Help us to just, be those sorts of children of yours here that want to just listen to everything you got to say, study everything you got to say. Help us to get back safely tonight. Help us to get out soul winning if we can in between the services, between now and Sunday. Help Saturday to go well with the men's fellowship as well, and help us to return Sunday for another day in your house. In Jesus' name for all of this. Amen.